So in this video, we cover atmospheric volume in Arnold for Cinema 4D. This shader or atmospheric effect allows you to simulate light scattered by atmosphere. You can use this effect with spotlight and all the area lights. We are in the classroom scene, and if you take a look at the IPR window, we have this basic lighting for this scene. A spotlight shines through the window. As atmosphere volume does not work with distant light, I used a spotlight and adjusted its setting to make it a more parallel light source to resemble a distant light. And we also have these 6 ceiling lights with a mesh light tag applied to them. To add an atmospheric volume to your scene, go to the settings, Arnold renderer, and under the main tab, go down to the environment rollout. Right beside the atmosphere field, you have this button which lets you to create and add an atmosphere volume shader. So click on this button and choose atmosphere volume. First, in the IPR, you notice we have some atmosphere volume effect going on. Also in the material manager, a new atmosphere volume has been created, and this is the shader that has been assigned to the atmosphere field of the environment rollout. You can create your own atmosphere volume right from the material manager and then assign it to the atmosphere field of the environment rollout if you wanted to. So from the create menu, Arnold, volume, atmosphere, and atmosphere volume, and now you can simply drag it to the atmosphere field if you wanted to. In this case, let's use the one that we created earlier. To make it simpler, let me turn off all the ceiling lights so we can deal with the spotlight only. Open up the atmosphere volume shader and let's go through its parameters. In order for atmospheric volume to work, you need to have a density higher than 0. Right now, density is set to 0.1 and we start to see some moody light scattering. Let's go to something like 0.6. And now the light scattering or atmospheric volume is strongly present. So density controls the atmospheric volume overall visibility or density. The first option we have is the color. We can control the color of the atmosphere volume effect. Let's try a few color here and you see the results in the IPR. For now, let's stick with the default white color. To make it more interesting, you can assign texture to the color attribute. So let's open up the network editor, press Ctrl Tab and search for a noise and connect the noise to the color input of our atmospheric volume shader. We can increase its scale in all directions to 3, octaves to 2, amplitude to 10, and distortion to 1. And now we get this complex atmospheric volume effect. We still can work on it, but as you can see, the noise is clearly affecting the distribution of the atmospheric volume. Now let's double click twice on that circle besides color input in our network editor and disconnect the noise node from our color input. And we are back where we started. Let's close the network editor and set the density to 1 for now. Then we have these attenuation parameters. As I increase attenuation, the light will only travel through the volume for a short distance. And as I decrease it, the light travels longer distances. If I set the attenuation to something like 0.2, the light can barely travel through the volume. Let's try 0.15. And now the light can travel further through the volume. 0.1. Even more, and finally 0. And now the light can go through the volume without being attenuated, and this values obviously depends on your scene, where's your light source, and all of that stuff. Now let's set the attenuation to around 0.15. The attenuation value is multiplied by the attenuation color. Let's say I want to attenuate the green and the blue colors and keep the reds. Simply set the green and blue values to 255 and keep the red at 0. And now green and blue are attenuated and red remains. And now you can control the amount of attenuation using the value if you wanted to. For now, let's set the attenuation values to their defaults. Then we have anisotropy. To see how this parameter works, it would be nice to see a light source itself. So let's turn off the spotlight and turn on the sixth ceiling light. If I use positive values here like 0.9 as the anisotropy value, more rays will be scattered in the direction that the light is facing. And as I go to the negative values, let's use something like negative 0.9, more rays will be scattered in the opposite direction. And if it is 0, the light will be scattered evenly in all directions. Let's set the anisotropy back to 0. Then we have samples, which obviously controls the quality of the atmospheric volume. Let me show you a few renders with different sample counts. For the first one, the sample value is set to 1. Very noisy. In the second render, samples are 3, and for the third and the fourth one, the samples are 7 and 10. So the first render, obviously we have too much volume noise, and as we increase the sample count, we get cleaner renders. But from a certain point, it does not make much of a difference. So probably 5 or 7 would be enough for this render. The other visible noise is from our light sources and especially indirect diffuse samples, but it's good for now. Now let's get back to our atmospheric volume shader, and we have this contribution attributes tab. You have camera, diffuse, and specular contributions of the shader. If you reduce the camera contribution to 0, you're basically making the effect invisible to the camera. I'm going to set it back to 1. If I increase diffuse contribution, the atmospheric volume will affect indirect GI diffuse rays, and as I increase and decrease this value, you can see the effect in the IPR. Having the diffuse contribution set to 1 or bigger than 0 will give a more physically accurate result, but the indirect diffuse noise from an atmosphere volume would be hard to clean, so that's why it is set to 0 by default. And using the specular contribution, you can control how much of the atmospheric volume effect will be seen and visible in specular reflections. Let's turn off the ceiling light and turn on the spotlight again. Now, if we wanted to control how much of an effect each individual light has on the atmosphere volume effect, in this scene, I probably prefer the ceiling light not to affect the volume scattering that much. Each light has this volume contribution parameter that we talked about in the first lesson of this section. So for the spotlight, for example, I can set its volume contribution to about 0.2. And now this light contributes only like 20% to the atmosphere volume shader in the scene compared to when it was 1. I'm going to set it back to 1 for now. And that's the atmosphere volume shader. Let's have a quick final render. I'm going to set the density for the atmosphere volume shader to around 0.8. Samples can be 7 for now. We can have a little fun with the color, so let's use this pale blue color as the scattering color. Turn on all the ceiling lamps. I'm going to select all the mesh light tags for the ceiling lamps and decrease the volume contribution for them to around 0.05, so they barely affect the volume scattering effect. In the render settings, we can set camera and diffuse samples to 6. And we can use the noising for the remaining noises if needs be. We also can increase the spotlight and the ceiling lamp samples to get a better direct lighting path, less noisy. I rendered the scene using these settings in the IPR, and let me show you the result in the picture viewer. And that's our render. You can have fun and try different colors for your light sources, for the atmosphere volume, work with density of the atmosphere or contribution of different lights, and come up with your own render. I'll be rendering a high resolution and save it to the render folder in your project files. While we are here, let me show you the high resolution render. There you go. Now I have another render to show you quickly. This one is more moody and more colorful. I'm going to quickly show you the changes I made in the scene. So the attenuation color was set to attenuate green and blues, and this way we get the reds. Attenuation was set to 0.18. The spotlight color was changed to this very warm temperature tone, and the ceiling lights were set to this eerie green, and their volume contribution was set to 0.2. And that's the render we get. So just have some fun and come up with some cool renders and colors. In this lesson, we'll learn about atmosphere volume in Arnold for Cinema 4D. See you in the next video.